The corridor outside the Alpha King's war chamber smelled of cedar smoke and old stone. Savenne pressed her back against the wall, steadying the tray of honeyed wine against her trembling hands. She had walked this hallway 1,000 times, had memorized the placement of every torch bracket, every crack in the granite, every shadow that pooled beneath the tapestries depicting the founding bloodlines of Corvanthus. But she had never stopped to listen before. Tonight was different. Tonight, her body carried a truth that would reshape everything, and she had come to tell Cadron before his council session ended. Before another night passed without him knowing what grew beneath her heart. Voices bled through the iron-banded oak door, low, masculine, edged with the easy arrogance of wolves who had never been challenged. "Must admit, my king, the girl is persistent." Laughter. Several voices joining in unison. Savenne's hands tightened on the tray. Persistent? That voice. Cadron's voice. The same voice that had whispered her name against her throat 3 nights ago. The same voice that had called her moonflower, while his fingers traced the silvered scar on her collarbone, where he had placed his claiming bite. She is more than persistent. She is relentless. More laughter. A servant girl who believes she has tamed the Alpha King. The speaker was Lord Herath, Cadron's chief war advisor. Seven recognized the nasal condescension immediately. "Tell me, Your Grace, does she truly think a nobody from the wash halls will sit on the throne of Corvanthus?" Seven stopped breathing. The tray began to rattle against her palms. "She serves a purpose," Cadron said. 3 words. Casual, dismissive, stripped of every tenderness she had ever heard in his voice. "And what purpose might that be?" Lord Herath pressed, amusement dripping from every syllable. A pause. Then Cadron spoke again, and every word drove into Savenne's chest like a blade forged from ice. "A king has needs that politics cannot satisfy, Herath. She is warm, she is willing, and she is foolish enough to believe that warmth and willingness earn a crown." His tone shifted, hardening into something she had never heard. "When the selecting begins next moon, I will choose a mate befitting my bloodline. Someone whose name carries weight, whose wolves command territory, not a girl who scrubs linens and mistakes gratitude for love." The laughter that erupted behind that door was the worst sound Savenne had ever heard. Not because it was cruel, though it was. Not because it was loud, though it echoed off the stone walls and burrowed into her skull like something alive. But because Cadron's voice was woven through it. His laugh. The laugh she had heard rumble against her ear when she said something that amused him in the quiet hours before dawn. The laugh she had believed belonged only to her. He was laughing at her. With them. For them. The tray slipped from Savenne's fingers. The carafe of honeyed wine struck the flagstones and shattered, sending amber liquid spreading across the corridor like spilled blood. The voices behind the door went silent. Savenne did not wait for it to open. She ran. She tore through the servants' passages, the claiming mark on her collarbone blazing with heat. She had given him everything: her body, her trust, the healing fire in her blood that her dead mother had warned her to hide from everyone, always. The gift she had shown Cadron because she believed he would never use her weakness against her. A claiming bite was supposed to be sacred, irrevocable. He had turned it into a brand of ownership. In her chamber, she pressed her forehead against the door until the trembling subsided. The child. Her hand moved to her lower belly, where the first stirrings of life had fluttered that morning. So faint she had thought she imagined it. But the midwife in the village below the castle had confirmed it 2 days ago, swearing secrecy with frightened eyes. Savenne had planned to tell him tonight, had pictured his hands on her belly, his voice rough with wonder. Instead, she had heard him laugh. The tears came and she let them fall, until grief became a luxury she could no longer afford. If Cadron viewed her as nothing more than a warm body, then she and the child she carried were disposable. Worse, they were inconvenient. A servant carrying the Alpha King's heir was not a romantic secret. It was a political catastrophe, and political catastrophes in Corvanthus had a way of being quietly eliminated. She packed with mechanical precision: a change of clothes, dried herbs, her mother's bone-handled knife, 11 copper coins. She paused at the river stone on the washstand, smooth and dark, with a vein of silver running through its center. Kadrin had given it to her the first night they spent together, pressing it into her palm with a solemnity that had made her heart ache. In the old ways, he had said, a wolf gives his mate a stone from the river where he was born. It means she carries a piece of his origin wherever she goes. Seven stared at the stone for a long moment. Then she set it on the washstand and turned away. The servant's gate was unguarded after midnight. She pulled her cloak tight and stepped into the darkness without looking back. She did not see Kadrin step into the hallway minutes later, his boots crunching on broken glass, his nostrils flaring at a scent beneath the wine that changed everything. She did not hear him whisper her name. By the time he reached her chamber and found it empty, the river stone sitting alone like an accusation, Seven was a mile into the frozen forest. And she was never coming back. 6 months ago, Seven had not known the Alpha King's face. Every wolf in the 5 territories knew the name Kadrin Aldervane, the young Alpha who had united the fractured clans after his father's assassination. But Seven was a wash hall servant, and kings did not visit wash halls. The night they met, she had been gathering moonwort in the forest. A massive black wolf had crashed through the underbrush and collapsed, its left flank torn open to the bone. Any rational person would have fled. Seven had knelt beside it instead. The healing fire came without her calling it. Golden warmth poured from her palms, knitting muscle and sealing skin. When the wound closed, the wolf shifted. A man knelt before her in the moonlight. "You are a healer," he said. Not a question. "You are the king," she answered. Also not a question. Kadrin came back to the forest the next night, and the night after. In the clearing by the silver birches, he was simply a man, exhausted by a kingdom he had never wanted, desperate for someone who saw him as more than a weapon or a throne. She learned he could name every star in the winter sky, that he flinched when anyone touched the scar his father's assassin had given him. He learned her mother had died when she was 9, leaving nothing but a knife and the secret of the healing fire. The first time he kissed her, the silver birches glowed like columns of white fire. His hands cupped her face, and she felt something crack open inside her. A door she had not known existed. The claiming bite came 3 weeks later, his teeth against her collarbone, marking her as his in the way of the old wolves. "The council will resist," he had warned, "but my wolf chose, and a wolf's choice is final. When the selecting comes, I will refuse every candidate and declare you before the entire kingdom." She had believed him with every fiber of her being. Now, stumbling through the frozen forest with his child quickening inside her, she understood that belief had been her greatest weakness. The forest swallowed her whole. Seven walked for hours through blackness, the cold gnawing through her cloak into her marrow. Her foot caught a root, and she went down hard, pain shooting through her wrists, her knees, her belly. "I am sorry," she whispered to the darkness inside her. "I will be enough for both of us." By morning she had reached the trade road and collapsed beneath a stone bridge. The claiming mark burned with persistent heat. It should have been fading. A broken bond dissolved within days. Instead, it was intensifying, as if the bond was fighting its own death. Her mind dragged her back to 4 nights ago. Kadrin beneath the silver birches, his face drawn with exhaustion. 3 more weeks, he had said, his forehead against hers. "I will stand before the elder houses and declare you. I would rather have you and a kingdom in revolt than every crown in the world without you." 4 days later, she had heard him laughing. She pressed both hands to her belly. "We survived," she corrected herself. She continued southeast. She did not see the black wolf on the ridge above the road, its amber eyes tracking her with a desperation that bordered on madness. She did not hear the howl, so anguished that every wolf within 10 miles stopped and turned. And something inside Cadron Aldervane began to die. 4 months had passed since the night Seven vanished into the frozen dark. She had walked for 11 days before she found Brannock Hollow. The village sat in a valley between two nameless ridges at the southeastern edge of the wolf territories, so far from the capital that most maps did not bother to include it. 40 houses, a mill, a blacksmith, a tavern that served watered ale and asked no questions of strangers. Seven had arrived half-starved, frost-bitten, and so visibly pregnant that the tavern keeper's wife had taken one look at her and dragged her inside by the arm without a word. "Widow?" the woman had asked, setting a bowl of broth before her. "Yes," Seven had lied. The word came easily. She had practiced it during the long nights on the road, shaping her story into something simple and sympathetic. A young wife. A husband killed by border raiders. A child on the way and nowhere left to go. Name? Marin. Another lie. She had chosen it because it sounded like nothing, because it was the kind of name that slid through memory without catching. The tavern keeper's wife, a broad-shouldered woman named Dorrit who seemed incapable of pity, but entirely capable of practical kindness, had offered her the empty groundskeeper's cottage at the edge of the village in exchange for whatever work she could manage. Seven had managed quite a lot. Within a week, the village discovered that the quiet young widow possessed an extraordinary gift for healing. She set the miller's broken wrist and had him grinding grain the next morning. She brewed a tea that cured the blacksmith's daughter of a cough that had lingered for 2 months. She delivered the tanner's wife's breech baby with calm hands and steady voice, while the tanner himself fainted in the doorway. No one asked where she had learned these skills. In Brannock Hollow, usefulness was currency enough. Now spring had given way to early summer, and Seveni's belly had grown round and heavy with the life inside her. She sat on the bench outside her cottage in the late afternoon light, grinding dried yarrow with her mother's mortar and pestle, watching the shadows lengthen across the valley floor. The cottage was small. One room with a hearth, a straw-stuffed mattress, a crooked table she had built herself from salvaged planks. Bundles of drying herbs hung from the ceiling beams, filling the air with the dusty sweetness of lavender and chamomile. On the windowsill, a row of clay jars held her tinctures and poultices, each one labeled in her careful hand. It was nothing. It was everything. She had built this life from nothing, and she would defend it with everything she had. The baby moved inside her, a slow rolling motion that had become familiar over the past weeks. But lately the movements had changed. They came from different places simultaneously. A kick low on her left side, while pressure bloomed high on her right. The village midwife, old Fenella, had noticed Seven's size during her last examination and clucked her tongue with knowing eyes. 2 heartbeats, Fenella had said, pressing her ear to Seven's belly. "You are carrying a pair, girl. Strong ones, too. They move like they are already arguing over space." Twins, Cadron's children, growing in the body of a woman he had called a convenience. But the claiming mark called her a liar. 4 months, and it had not faded. It had darkened, raised and warm, pulsing with a heartbeat not her own. Sometimes before dawn she felt something through it. A presence, vast and desperate, reaching for her across the distance. The first time it happened, she had sat up gasping as heat flooded through her body. For one disorienting moment she felt him, rage, grief, and a longing so immense it stole the breath from her lungs. She buried the feeling beneath every wall she knew how to build. Then Pip arrived, the blacksmith's son, 12 years old, face smudged with soot. Traders came through the pass. They say the Alpha King has lost his mind. He has sent wolves to every village in the 5 territories searching for a woman. The crops in the western provinces are dying. The wolves have gone strange. After Pip left, Seven sat motionless, staring at the mountains to the northwest. He was searching. 4 months. And the mark burned. And somewhere in the distance she heard the echo of a wolf's howl on the wind. "You are not coming for me," she whispered. "You are coming for what I carry." The babies kicked, both sides at once as if disagreeing. 2 weeks later, the rumors grew worse. Lord Herath had been stripped of his titles and imprisoned. 3 other lords suffered the same fate. "They say he tore his war chamber apart with his bare hands," old Fenella murmured during an evening visit. "Clawed the stone walls. They say he found a broken wine carafe on the corridor floor, and whatever he smelled on those shards changed everything." Fenella's eyes settled on Seven with uncomfortable precision. A woman who runs in winter, who arrives at a remote village with a belly full of secret, who possesses healing gifts no common wolf should carry. She sipped her tea. "A curious coincidence, Marin." "I will not betray you," Fenella said quietly. "But the king's wolves have been seen in the eastern valleys, and 10,000 gold is a great deal of money to a village that cannot shoe its horses." 10,000 gold. A description that matched her exactly. Dark hair, gray eyes, a silver scar on her collarbone. She was calculating escape routes when she saw them. 3 shapes at the tree line, shifted wolves, sentries, watching her cottage. The mark erupted, white-hot, blinding. Through it she felt him, not miles away. Close enough that every nerve ignited with the awareness of his presence. A knock at her door. She grabbed the fire poker and opened it. A lean man with close-cropped gray hair and dark brown eyes stood on her threshold. Genuine sorrow in his expression. "My lady, I am Tolvarn, second fang to the Alpha King. I have been searching for you for 119 days. You have the wrong person." His gaze found the silver scar at her throat. "You are Seven, and you carry his children. I can hear 2 heartbeats beneath your own." He told her the truth. The wine had contained night bloom extract, a compound that strips emotional barriers. It does not create false thoughts, but removes the love, the loyalty, the bond instinct that would normally silence the cold political calculus every king carries. "You are saying he was drugged," Saveni said flatly. "That is very convenient. 3 days after you left, the king woke from what he describes as a fog. He went to your chamber, found the river stone. He held that stone for hours, sitting on your bed, trying to understand. Then he shifted and ran, following your scent until a rainstorm washed it from the road." Tolvarn's voice dropped. He stood in the rain on an empty road and simply stopped, as if the mechanism that kept him alive had been removed. Then Tolvarn showed her a letter bearing the serpent and crown seal of House Herath. "The servant has been located. She carries the king's blood. Both problems must be eliminated before the new moon. Send the quiet ones." "Assassins," she breathed. 6 wolves trained from birth to kill silently. A bark of warning split the air, sentry wolves raising the alarm. Tolvarn was at the window in 2 strides. "They are here." 6 wolves fanned across the meadow, mottled brown and black, moving with synchronized precision. Behind them, a figure in a hooded cloak the color of dried blood, the handler. An arrow punched through the window. The arrowhead glistened with poison. "They are not trying to take me alive," Seven said. Tolvarn shifted, his human form tearing apart as a massive brown wolf crashed through the door, the guard wolf at his side. Through the shattered window, Seven watched the battle. The quiet ones attacked in coordinated pairs. The guard wolf went down first. Tolvarn killed 1 assassin, but 3 more circled him. Blood matted his fur. 1 rear leg dragged. He was losing. and something cracked open inside Seven's chest. Not grief, not fear, fury. These wolves had come to kill her children. She stepped into the meadow. The golden light that erupted from her hands was blinding. Every wolf froze. She walked to Tolvarn and pressed her palms to his wounds. Bone snapping into alignment, torn muscle knitting whole. One assassin lunged. The light detonated outward, hurling it backward. It bolted. Two more followed, nerve broken, but two remained, and the handler stepped forward, drawing a curved blade. Hareth said you might have the old fire. He said it would not be enough. She was right. The healing and shockwave had drained everything. Seveni's light flickered. Her knees buckled. The handler raised the blade. The ground shook. The tree line exploded as something massive crashed through. A wolf the size of a draft horse. Black as the void between stars, eyes blazing amber fire so intense they cast actual light. The handler was dead before her arm completed the motion. The black wolf moved with a speed that broke the eye's ability to track it. One moment it was at the tree line. The next, its jaws had closed around the handler's torso and flung the broken body into the darkness. The two remaining quiet ones did not run. They tried. But the black wolf was among them before they could take a single stride. 2 wolves, 2 seconds. 2 bodies crumpling into the grass with the boneless finality of creatures whose spines had been severed by jaws that could crush stone. Then silence. The massive wolf stood in the center of the carnage, sides heaving, blood dripping from its muzzle onto the trampled meadow grass. Its head swung in a slow arc, scanning for threats, finding none. Those burning amber eyes found Seven. She was on her knees in the grass, her hands pressed to her belly, her golden light extinguished, her body trembling with exhaustion and adrenaline and something else. Something the bond was screaming at her, something her mind refused to accept, but her heart recognized instantly. The wolf approached her. Each step was slow, deliberate. The violence that had animated it moments before drained away with every pace, replaced by a caution so profound it seemed impossible in a creature that had just killed 6 wolves in the span of a heartbeat. It stopped before her, lowered its massive head, and pressed its nose, still warm with blood, gently against her belly. Both babies kicked, simultaneously, violently, as if every cell in their unborn bodies was reaching toward the presence they had felt through the bond for months. The distant fire, the searching anguish, the love that had never stopped burning no matter how far their mother ran. The wolf made a sound, not a growl, not a whimper. Something between the two, a vibration that resonated in Seven's ribcage and made her eyes sting with tears she had sworn she would never shed again. Kadrin, she whispered. The shift happened between one breath and the next. One moment, a wolf. The next, a man kneeling before her in the blood-soaked grass, his hands hovering over her stomach, his entire body trembling with a restraint that looked like it was costing him his sanity. He looked up at her. The Alpha King of Corvanthus was weeping. Not silently, not with dignity. His face was shattered, contorted with an emotion so raw and overwhelming that it stripped away every trace of the powerful, controlled king she had known. Tears carved tracks through the blood on his cheeks. His breath came in ragged, broken gasps. His hands shook so violently he could not hold them still. "You are alive," he choked. "You are alive, and you, Seven, you are—" His eyes dropped to her belly. His hands reached, stopped, hovered. "May I?" he asked, and something inside Seveni's chest, something she had spent months building, reinforcing, fortifying against exactly this moment, crumbled to dust. Because the most powerful wolf in 5 territories was on his knees before her in a field of bodies, asking permission to touch his own children. And the look on his face was not possession, Not politics, not the calculated interest of a king securing his legacy. It was terror. Pure, bottomless terror that she would say no. Seven took his trembling hand and pressed it to her stomach. The babies erupted, both of them, moving with a violence that made her gasp, kicks and rolls and pushes coming from every direction at once, as if two small bodies were trying to climb through her skin to reach their father's palm. Cadron made a sound that was not a word in any language. His hand flattened against her belly, feeling the dual movements, feeling the impossible reality of two lives he had not known existed until this moment. Twins, Saveni said quietly. They are yours. The Alpha King pressed his forehead to her stomach and wept. Seven had imagined this moment every night for months. In some versions, she was cold, impenetrable. She looked at him with the same indifference he had shown her behind that closed door and watched him break the way she had broken. In other versions, she was violent. She struck him, clawed at him, screamed every poisoned word back into his face until he understood what it felt like to be gutted by someone you loved. In none of her imaginings had the Alpha King been kneeling before her in a field of dead wolves, pressing his forehead to her pregnant belly and weeping with the unrestrained agony of a man who had been holding himself together with nothing but fury and hope for months and had finally found the thing that let him fall apart. Seven stared down at the top of his head. His dark hair was longer than she remembered, matted with sweat and blood. His shoulders, those broad, powerful shoulders she had traced with her fingertips in the moonlit clearing, shook with sobs he made no effort to control. The bond between them roared. It flooded through the claiming mark on her collarbone with a force that stole her breath. His emotions crashed into hers. Not words, not thoughts, but raw sensation. Relief so vast it felt like drowning. Fear that she would pull away. And beneath everything, pulsing like a second heartbeat, a love so fierce and desperate it burned. Seven wanted to push him away. She wanted to. Instead, her hand moved to his hair. Her fingers threaded through the tangled strands and rested against his skull, and she felt the sob that shuddered through his body at her touch. "You need to stand up," she said quietly. "We need to talk. And I need you to stop crying long enough to answer my questions." Cadron raised his head. His face was a ruin. Blood-streaked, tear-soaked, gaunt with months of suffering. The amber of his eyes blazed with a light that was not entirely human. His wolf was close to the surface, barely leashed, and she could feel through the bond how thin the barrier between man and beast had become. "Ask me anything," he said, and his voice was raw, stripped to the bone. "Anything, Seven. I will answer until I have no words left." "Then answer this." She pulled her hand away from his hair and he flinched at the loss of contact as if she had struck him. "Why should I believe you were drugged? Why should I believe anything you say when I heard your true feelings spoken in your own voice to men you trusted more than me?" "Because those were not my feelings." Cadron rose to his feet, and she saw how much the movement cost him. He was thinner than she remembered. The powerful frame she had pressed herself against in the darkness of their clearing had been carved away by months of sleeplessness and anguish. "Seven, I swear to you on every ancestor whose blood runs in my veins, I would sooner cut out my own tongue than speak those words about you. But you did speak them. My mouth spoke them. My mind was not present." His hands clenched at his sides, and she watched the tendons stand out along his forearms. "Hareth's compound did not put words in my head. Tolvarn told you what it does. It strips away the barriers. The love, the loyalty, the bond instinct that governs how an alpha speaks about his mate. What you heard was the cold political calculus that every king carries but never voices, because his wolf would never allow it. So somewhere inside you," Seven said slowly, "there is a part that thinks of me as a warm, willing convenience." The words hit him like a physical blow. She watched him absorb them, watched the color drain from his face, watched his jaw clench so hard she could hear his teeth grinding. "There is a part of every king that thinks in terms of advantage," he said, and the honesty clearly cost him more than any wound. "A part that weighs bloodlines and alliances and political value. I will not lie to you about that, Seven. That calculation exists. It exists in every alpha who has ever sat on a throne." She started to turn away, but it is not the part that matters. His hand caught her wrist. Gently, so gently, as if she were made of something that might shatter. "The part that matters is the wolf. The bond. The soul-deep recognition that you are mine and I am yours, and no political calculation in any kingdom will ever change that truth." "Then why did the drug work?" The question tore from her throat, carrying months of agony. If the bond was real, if the wolf's choice was final, why could a cup of poisoned wine undo it all? Kadrin's face crumbled. Because the bond was not complete. The bond was not complete. His voice dropped. "I marked you, but you never marked me." The bond was one-directional, vulnerable to a compound designed to suppress it. Her hand flew to her collarbone. The mark burned, and she understood why it had never faded. Not broken, incomplete. "That is why I could still feel you," he said. "Every night." "I felt you too," she said fiercely. "I told myself the bond was dead and my body was lying." He told her about the conspiracy, Harath and 3 lords planning the drugging for months. 3 weeks after she left, he had shifted and could not shift back for 5 days. Tolvarn had sat outside his chamber door, talking ceaselessly, keeping his human mind anchored. "I was going to tell you about the babies that night," she whispered. I had practiced the words. The sound he made was not human. I would have been the happiest man in 5 territories. A sob escaped her. One, small and raw. "I cannot forgive you yet," she said quietly. "This will take time. I know. But I believe you. I believe the bond. And I believe you are here because you love me, not because I carry something you want to control." He reached for her hand. She let him take it. Tolvarn's voice cut through the darkness. "My king, we have a problem." A scout delivered the news. Lord Harath had escaped the dungeons 2 days ago. Guards found dead, help from inside the castle. He had rallied the stripped lords, seized the capital, and declared himself Lord Protector. 43 loyalist wolves were hostages in the Great Hall, including Dorrit, who had traveled to the capital for medical supplies. "We go to the capital," Seven said. "Seven, you cannot. Dorrit is there because of me. I will not hide while she dies. I spent 4 months being the woman who runs. That ends now." Something shifted in his expression. Not surrender, recognition. "You are my queen. I will not dishonor that by treating you as something to be locked away." He addressed the 100 wolves assembled behind them. "The traitor has taken our home. He believes he has won. He is wrong." The growl became a roar. "We ride for Corvanthus tonight. We take back what is ours. And we show every traitor in every territory what happens when you threaten the alpha's mate and the heirs she carries." The howl that erupted from 100 wolf throats shook the valley walls and sent birds screaming from every tree in a mile radius. Kadrin lifted Seven onto his horse, a massive black stallion that had been brought forward by one of the scouts, and mounted behind her, his arm wrapping around her waist with a possessiveness that the bond translated not as control, but as a vow. "Together," he said against her hair. Seven leaned back against his chest and felt his heartbeat against her spine. The babies settled into stillness, as if the proximity of their father's body had given them permission to rest for the first time in months. "Together," she answered. The army moved through the night like a dark tide. As they rode, Kadrin spoke. Not the careful, curated words of a king addressing a subject, but the raw, unfiltered confession of a man who had been holding poison inside him for months and could not contain it any longer. He told her about waking from the night bloom haze, about the disorientation, the gap in his memory, the sick wrongness that coated his thoughts like oil on water. About going to her chamber and finding it empty, the river stone sitting on the washstand like the period at the end of a sentence. I held that stone for hours, he said, his voice rough against her hair. Sat on your bed and held it and tried to understand what had happened. My wolf knew. Before my mind caught up, my wolf was already howling, already dying. He told her about the search, the wolves sent to every corner of the kingdom, the nights spent in wolf form, running until his paws bled, following traces of her scent that always led to dead ends. The slow, grinding realization that she had vanished so completely, it was as if the earth had swallowed her. I went back to the clearing every night for the first month, he whispered. Sat beneath the silver birches and reached for you through the bond. I thought, I hoped, that if you felt me you might come back. I felt you, Saven said quietly. Every night. I thought I was going mad. His arm tightened around her. You were the only thing keeping me sane, that faint pulse through the bond. Your heartbeat, your presence, the proof that you were still alive somewhere in the world. Without it, I would have gone feral weeks ago. Tolvarn said the same. Tolvarn understates everything. The truth is worse than he told you. A pause. 3 weeks after you left, I shifted and could not shift back. For 5 days, I was trapped in wolf form. My advisors thought I was gone permanently. Tolvarn sat outside my chamber door for every one of those 5 days, talking to me, keeping my human mind anchored until I could claw my way back. Seven closed her eyes. I am sorry, she said. Do not apologize. His voice hardened. You did what any sane person would do after hearing what you heard. You protected yourself and our children. The fault lies with Hareth and no one else. They rode in silence for a while, the army flowing around them like a river of fur and moonlight. Then Saven spoke. The river stone. I left it behind on purpose. I know. I wanted you to understand that I was returning everything, that I was leaving with nothing of yours. You left with the most important thing I will ever create. His hand moved to her belly. You left with my entire future. Dawn was breaking when the army crested the final ridge and the capital of Corvanthus spread before them. Seven's breath caught. Smoke rose from the lower quarters of the city, the great banner above the castle gates. The black wolf on a silver field that had flown above Corvanthus for 12 generations had been torn down. In its place flew a crimson standard bearing the serpent and crown sigil of House Herath. He works fast, Tolvarn observed grimly. He has been planning this for years, Kadrin replied. The drugging, the coup, every piece positioned before the first move was made. Herath did not just want to control my marriage, he wanted the throne itself. A rider burst from the city gates, pushing a lathered horse to its limits. One of Kadrin's scouts, his face gray with exhaustion. My king, the hostages have been moved to the Great Hall. Hareth has tripled the guard. He knows you are coming. The scout hesitated. There is something else. Hareth has found a woman. One of the elder house daughters, Lady Veska of the Southern Marches. He intends to force a selecting before sundown. If he can bind you to a politically approved mate by witnessed oath, your claim on Saven becomes illegitimate. Kadrin's snarl vibrated through Saven's body. He cannot force a selecting without the Alpha's consent, Tolvarn argued. He does not need the Alpha's consent if the Alpha is declared unfit. The scout's voice dropped. The 3 lords are backing his petition. They claim the Alpha's bond to a commonborn has driven him to madness. Under the old laws, a mad Alpha can be deposed and replaced by the Lord Protector's chosen successor. And let me guess, Saveni said quietly, The chosen successor is Hareth himself. His eldest son, actually, Calix Hareth. He is already inside the castle. The name landed like a stone in a still pond. Seven felt Kadrin's body tense behind her, felt the bond flood with a rage so vast it threatened to consume them both. Then we do not have until sunrise, Kadrin said. We have until sundown. The plan was 7 A's. Kadrin fought it. Tolvarn fought it harder. Every wolf in the war council that assembled on the ridge above the capital fought it with the desperate conviction of creatures who understood exactly how much was at stake. But Seven was immovable. Hareth holds 43 hostages, she said. The moment your army attacks the walls, he will start killing them. You know this. His position is indefensible without leverage, and those hostages are his only leverage. Then we find another way in, Kadrin argued. Tunnels, sewers, the old passages beneath the castle. All of which Hareth knows about as well as you do. He served as your war advisor for 3 years, Kadrin. He knows every weakness in those walls because he helped you fortify them. The silence that followed was the sound of a king recognizing a truth he did not want to accept. Hareth does not want your army, Seven continued. He does not want a siege. He wants legitimacy. He wants the selecting to proceed so he can replace you legally under the old laws. And the one thing that threatens his entire plan is evidence that you already have a bonded mate. Which is why he sent assassins to kill you, Tolvarn interjected. Yes, but I am not dead. And my existence, my visible, undeniable existence, is the one thing that makes a forced selecting impossible. Seven met Kadrin's eyes. If I walk into that great hall, in front of every wolf Hareth has assembled, and I am visibly carrying the Alpha King's children, his entire legal argument collapses. He cannot declare you unfit for bonding with a common-born if that bond has produced heirs. Those laws protect the bloodline above all else. And if he simply kills you the moment you walk through the door? Kadrin's voice was barely controlled. He will not. Not in front of witnesses. Hareth is a politician, not a butcher. His power depends on the appearance of legitimacy. Killing a pregnant woman bearing the royal heirs in front of 43 hostages and a hall full of his own supporters would destroy the very authority he is trying to build. You are gambling your life on the vanity of a man who already tried to have you assassinated. I am gambling my life on the certainty that Hareth values his ambition more than his hatred. Seven placed her hand over Kadrin's, and I am not gambling alone. You will be outside those walls with 100 wolves. The moment the hostages are safe, you come in. But they have to be safe first, Kadrin. Dorit has to be safe first. The Alpha King stared at her. Through the bond, she felt the war raging inside him, the primal screaming need to protect her battling against the knowledge that she was right. If anything happens to you, he said, and his voice was the quietest she had ever heard it, I will not survive it. Do you understand that? My wolf will not survive losing you twice. Then make sure you are ready when I give the signal. What signal? Seveni smiled. It was not a kind smile. It was the smile of a woman who had spent months building walls around her heart and was now prepared to use every stone as a weapon. You will know it when you feel it. The castle gates were closed, but the postern door on the eastern wall stood open. An invitation or a trap, impossible to tell. Seven walked toward it alone, her cloak pulled tight around her belly, her heart hammering so hard she could feel each beat in the claiming mark on her collarbone. 2 guards flanked the postern, both in half-shifted form, human bodies with wolf ears, claws, and amber eyes that tracked her approach with predatory attention. I am Seven, she said, and the name felt strange on her tongue after months of being Marin. I am the woman Lord Hareth has been trying to kill. I am here to speak with him. The guards exchanged a look of disbelief. I am unarmed, she added, opening her cloak to show her swollen belly. And as you can see, I am not in a position to be a physical threat to anyone. They let her through. The corridors of the castle she had once called home were unrecognizable. Herath's crimson banners hung from every wall. Soldiers bearing the serpent and crown sigil stood at every intersection. The air smelled of smoke and fear, and the sharp, acrid tang of wolves who had been kept in close quarters too long. Seven walked through it all with her chin raised and her hands steady, though inside her chest, her heart was a caged animal throwing itself against her ribs. The doors of the great hall loomed before her, massive, iron-banded, the same doors she had slipped past 100 times as a servant carrying fresh linens and never once imagining she would walk through them as anything else. She pushed them open. The great hall of Corvanthus was vast, a cathedral of stone and shadow built by the first Alpha 12 generations ago. Iron chandeliers blazed with firelight, casting writhing shadows across the vaulted ceiling. At the far end, on the raised dais where the Alpha's throne stood, Lord Herath sat with the casual ease of a man who believed he had already won. He was older than his voice had suggested, white-haired, sharp-featured, with the lean build of a wolf who had survived more by cunning than strength. His eyes were pale gray, nearly colorless, and they fixed on Seven with an expression that mingled surprise with something that looked almost like admiration. Beside him stood a young man with the same colorless eyes, Calyx, his heir, and behind them both, in a gown of white silk that could only mean one thing, stood Lady Vesca, the chosen candidate for the forced selecting. The hostages knelt in a row before the dais, 43 wolves, hands bound, faces drawn with exhaustion and fear. And at the end of the row, her broad shoulders unbowed despite the ropes around her wrists, knelt Dorrit. The tavern keeper's wife saw Seven and her eyes went wide. "Girl, no," Dorrit whispered. "What are you doing here?" "Keeping a promise," Seven said. She turned to face Herath. "Lord Herath, you have spent a great deal of gold trying to kill me. I thought I would save you the expense and come to you directly." Herath leaned forward on the stolen throne. "The servant girl. I must confess, I expected you to be more impressive. And I expected you to be taller." A ripple of shock passed through the hall. Even among Herath's own supporters, an unarmed pregnant woman insulting the Lord Protector to his face was not something anyone had prepared for. Herath's lips thinned. "You have courage. I will grant you that. More courage than sense, perhaps. Perhaps, but I did not come here to trade insults." Seven placed both hands on her belly, making the gesture visible to every person in the hall. "I came here to make you an offer." "An offer?" Herath's eyebrow rose. "You are a servant carrying an illegitimate child. What could you possibly offer me?" "Your survival." The word hung in the air. Right now, the Alpha King stands outside these walls with 100 wolves who would happily tear this castle to rubble. The only thing stopping them is the 43 hostages you are using as shields. Release them, and you can negotiate your surrender with some dignity." Herath laughed. "Surrender? Girl, I hold this castle. I hold the throne. I hold the authority of the old laws. Your lover is a mad wolf howling at the gates, and you are a pregnant commoner with no bloodline, no title, and no power." "You are wrong about one of those things," Seven said quietly. "Which one?" "The last." The golden light bloomed from her palms. Herath shot to his feet. Guards reached for weapons. Lady Vesca stumbled backward with a gasp, but Savannah did not attack. She simply stood in the center of the great hall, glowing with the ancient fire that ran in her blood, and let every wolf in the room feel what she was. Not a servant, not a commoner, not a nobody from the wash halls. A healer. A true-born healer, carrying a power that had not been seen in the wolf territories for 3 generations. A power that the ancient laws declared sacred and untouchable. The very laws you love to cite, Seven said, state that a true-born healer is sovereign in her own right. She cannot be killed, captured, or compelled. She cannot be declared illegitimate, and any bond she forms is recognized by every pack in the 5 territories, regardless of bloodline. Herath's face had gone the color of old ash. You built your entire coup on the argument that a common-born cannot be the alpha's mate, Seven continued. But I am not common-born. I carry the old fire, and the children in my belly, the alpha's heirs, carry it too. The hall erupted. Harith recovered faster than Seven expected. Guards, he snapped. Seize her. Healer or not, we can debate this after she is in chains. 6 soldiers moved toward her. The light around Savani's hands intensified, but she could feel the cost already. The healing she had poured into Tolvarn, the shockwave that had scattered the quiet ones. Her reserves were depleted, and the power she was displaying now was bluffer than substance. If she had to fight 6 armed wolves, she would last seconds. She did not need to fight. She needed to stall. You are making a mistake, she said, backing toward the hostages. Every wolf in this hall can feel what I am. If you put chains on a true-born healer, every pack in the 5 territories will turn against you. Not because they love me, because the old laws are the foundation of everything your power rests on. Break one, and they all crumble. She is right. The voice came from the hostage line. Dorrit, still on her knees with bound wrists, had lifted her chin with the defiant authority of a woman who had been giving orders in her own domain for 30 years. You lay a hand on that girl and you will have a revolt that makes the king's army look like a summer breeze. Harath's soldiers hesitated. The political wolves among them, the ones who had joined the coup out of calculation rather than conviction, were exchanging uneasy glances. A true-born healer was not something you gambled with. The old laws regarding their sovereignty were among the most ancient and deeply held tenets of wolfkind, predating even the alpha bloodline itself. Enough of this. Calix Herath stepped forward, drawing a blade from his belt. He was younger than his father, bolder, and significantly less concerned with appearances. She is a servant who can do parlor tricks with her hands. The old laws do not apply to conjurers and charlatans. He advanced on Seven with the confident stride of a man who had never been afraid of anything in his life. The mark on Seveni's collarbone detonated, not with pain, with something else entirely. A surge of energy that did not come from her own reserves, but through the bond, raw, volcanic, absolute. Kadrin's fury, channeled across the incomplete connection with the force of a dam breaking. The light around her hands shifted color, deepened, became something richer, fiercer. Not the warm gold of healing, but a blazing amber that matched the eyes of every alpha who had ever ruled Corvanthus. She had not known the bond could do this, had not known that the connection between mates could serve as a conduit for power as well as emotion. But the children inside her knew. They had always known. And they responded to their father's rage by opening a channel that their mother had never realized existed. Do not touch me, Seveni said, and her voice was doubled. Her own and something deeper. Something that resonated with the authority of 12 generations of alpha blood. Calix Herath stopped walking. Not by choice. His legs simply refused to carry him forward. The amber light radiating from Seveni pressed against him like a physical force, and every wolf instinct in his body screamed at him that the woman before him was not prey. She was the alpha's mate, and the alpha's power flowed through her like fire through a forge. The signal. Outside the castle walls, Kadrin felt it. The bond between them blazed with a brilliance that turned his vision white, and he understood with absolute clarity what Seven was doing. What the babies were doing. What the incomplete bond had become in the hands of a healer who carried the old fire and twins who carried the alpha's blood. A bridge. They had become a bridge. His howl shattered the morning air. The castle gates exploded inward as 100 wolves poured through, led by a black shape so massive it seemed to absorb the light around it. Kadrin, in full wolf form, moving with a speed that turned the world into a blur of blood and shadow. Inside the great hall, the effect was instantaneous. Herath's soldiers broke. Not all of them. Some fought, driven by loyalty or desperation or the simple inability to imagine surrender. But most threw down their weapons as the Alpha King's wolves flooded through the shattered doors with the force of a tidal wave. Calix Herath did not throw down his blade. He turned toward the hostages. "If I cannot have the throne," he snarled, raising the blade over Dorrit's bowed head, "then no one." Seven's hand closed around his wrist. The golden amber light surged through the contact. Calix screamed as his fingers spasmed, the blade clattering to the floor. She twisted his arm with a strength she did not possess on her own. A strength borrowed through the bond, channeled through the children, wielded by a mother who would tear the world in half before she let another person die for her sake. She flung him backward. He hit the stone floor and did not get up. Then she knelt beside Dorrit and began cutting the ropes with her bare, glowing hands, the light slicing through the fibers like heated wire through wax. "You foolish, brave, impossible girl," Dorrit choked, her composure cracking for the first time since Seven had known her. "I told you to stay hidden. And I told you I was done running." One by one, the hostages were freed. One by one, they stumbled toward the safety of the Alpha King's wolves, who formed a living perimeter around the center of the hall. Kadrin shifted at the base of the dais, his human form rising from the wolf, like a man stepping from shadow into light. His eyes found Seven immediately, always immediately, as if she was the fixed point around which his entire existence oriented. Lord Herath stood alone on the dais, his supporters fled or fallen, his stolen authority crumbling with every second. His colorless eyes moved between Kadrin and Seveni, calculating, assessing, searching for an angle that no longer existed. "It is over, Herath," Kadrin said. "Your quiet ones are dead. Your soldiers have surrendered. Your son is unconscious on the floor of my great hall. And the woman you tried to erase is standing before you carrying the next generation of the Alpha bloodline and wielding more power than you have ever possessed or ever will." Herath's lip curled. "You will destroy the old order for this girl. You will tear apart 1,000 years of tradition because your wolf chose a servant. My wolf chose my mate. And my mate chose to walk into a castle full of enemies to save strangers who showed her kindness when no one else would." Kadrin's voice hardened. "That is the Queen Corventhus deserves. Not a political arrangement. Not a bloodline transaction. A woman who would burn to protect the people who cannot protect themselves." He turned to Seven. The bond between them thrummed with a resonance that made the air in the great hall vibrate. "The bond," he said hoarsely. "It needs to be completed. If you are willing." Seven looked at him. At the man who had broken her heart without knowing it. At the king who had torn his kingdom apart to find her. At the father of the children who had just channeled his power through her body to save 43 strangers. She thought of the laughter behind the door. She thought of the exile. She thought of the bridge the babies had built between their parents. A connection forged not by politics or ceremony, but by the simple, desperate, unbreakable need of children reaching for the family they deserved. "I am willing," she said. Kadrin tilted his head, baring his throat in the ancient gesture of a wolf offering himself to his mate. The most powerful man in 5 territories, exposing the most vulnerable part of his body to the woman who had every reason to tear it open. Seveni stepped forward. She placed her hand on his chest, feeling his heartbeat thunder beneath her palm. Then she leaned up and pressed her lips to the place where his neck met his shoulder. Her teeth sank into his flesh. The bond detonated. Not gently, not gradually. It erupted between them with the force of a dam bursting, two halves of a single soul crashing together after months of separation and agony and longing that had nearly destroyed them both. Seven gasped against his skin as his entire existence poured into her. She saw herself through his eyes, not the servant from the wash halls, not the convenient body he had described while drugged and hollow. She saw the woman who had knelt beside a dying wolf and healed it without hesitation. The woman whose laugh made his chest ache. The woman whose gray eyes held a quiet strength that humbled him in ways no battle ever could. The woman he loved with every molecule of his being, so completely and so irrevocably that the drug had needed to erase her from his consciousness entirely just to make him speak against her. And he saw himself through hers. Not the king who had laughed, not the monster she had built in her mind during months of exile. He saw the man who gave her a river stone because he wanted her to carry a piece of his heart. The man who sat beneath silver birches and counted stars because she asked him to. The man whose hands trembled when he touched her face, not from weakness, but from the overwhelming awareness that he was holding something infinitely precious. The man who stood in the rain on an empty road and stopped living because she was gone. He saw the night she heard the laughter, felt it through her. The shattering, the disbelief. The moment her trust fractured into 1,000 pieces that cut her from the inside with every breath. He felt her run through the frozen forest, felt her collapse beneath the stone bridge, felt her whisper to the child in her belly that she would be enough for both of them. And something inside Cadron Aldervane broke permanently. Not in the way things break when they are destroyed, in the way things break when they are remade. The arrogance, the entitlement, the unconscious assumption that his crown made him worthy of her. All of it shattered, replaced by a humility so absolute that it remade the foundation of his soul. When Seven released him, they were both trembling. Tears streamed down both their faces. The claiming mark on her collarbone blazed silver white, and a matching mark had appeared on his throat, a mirror scar that proclaimed their bond to every wolf who would ever see it. Complete, sealed, unbreakable. "My queen," Cadron whispered. "My king," she answered. Around them, every wolf in the great hall lifted its voice. The howl that filled the ancient stones was not a sound of victory. It was something older, deeper. The collective recognition of a bond that had survived poison and betrayal and exile and assassination and a 4-month winter of the soul, and had emerged not diminished, but forged into something that could never be undone. The wolves of Corvanthus had found their queen, and she had been worth the wait. In the weeks that followed, Corvanthus healed. Not quickly, not painlessly, but with the steady, inexorable certainty of a land responding to the restoration of its alpha's bond. Lord Herath stood trial before the assembled packs. The evidence was overwhelming. The Nightbloom compound, the intercepted assassination orders, the conspiracy to overthrow the crown. He was stripped of his name, his wolf, and his territories. The sentence was exile to the Ashen Moor, the barren wasteland beyond the northern mountains where nothing grew and no pack ran. He would live out his days alone, without the wolf that had been his birthright, in a silence more absolute than any dungeon. Calix Herath received the same sentence. Father and son walked into the wasteland together, diminished, wolfless, carrying nothing but the knowledge of what their ambition had cost them. The 3 lords who had participated in the conspiracy were given a choice: exile or service. 2 chose exile. The third, a younger lord named Draven who had been coerced into the conspiracy through threats against his family, chose service. Cadron assigned him to rebuild the western provinces, the very territories his co-conspirators had damaged during the coup. It was not forgiveness. It was a chance to earn back what he had helped destroy. Lady Vesca returned to the southern marches, her role in the forced selecting acknowledged as coerced rather than willing. She sent Sivan a letter that arrived 3 weeks later, written in a careful hand that betrayed more emotion than the formal language intended. I am glad you survived. I am glad he found you. The throne was never mine to want, and I hope you know that the South will stand behind you without reservation. Seven kept the letter. The crops that had withered in the Alpha's absence began to grow again. The wolves who had gone feral, driven to madness by the broken bond between their king and his true mate, returned to their senses as the completed bond radiated stability throughout the pack structure. The land itself seemed to breathe easier, as if a pressure that had been building for months had finally been released. Seven was crowned in a ceremony nothing like the lavish selecting she had once feared. Kadrin had offered her anything: 1,000 guests, a feast that lasted for days, a celebration worthy of a queen whose journey had earned it. She had asked for the clearing by the silver birches. They stood beneath the white-barked trees in the moonlight. Just the two of them, Tolvarn standing witness, and old Fenella, who had traveled from Brannock Hollow specifically because, as she put it, someone needs to make sure you do not do anything foolish, and I am the only one qualified. Dorrit had come too, bringing half the village with her. They stood at the edge of the clearing, not intruding, simply present. The people who had taken in a frightened stranger and given her a home when the world had offered nothing. The crown was simple: a circlet of silver birch wood, woven by Kadrin's own hands, set with a single river stone, the same stone she had left behind on the washstand the night she fled. He had carried it with him every day since, every single day. I should have given you this the night we met, he said, placing it on her head. I should have known from the first moment that you were the only queen these woods would ever need. If you had given me a crown that night, Seven replied, I would have thought you were insane. I was insane. I am insane. I am the king who tore apart his kingdom for a woman he found healing a wolf in the moonlight, and I would do it again without hesitation. She kissed him, under the silver birches, in the clearing where they had first confessed what they were to each other. With the moon overhead and the wolves howling in the distance, and the babies turning inside her as if they too wanted to witness the moment their world finally became whole. 3 weeks later, Seven gave birth to twins. The labor was long and fierce, befitting children of the Alpha bloodline, and when the first cry pierced the air of the royal chamber, Kadrin, who had fought assassins and coups and his own fractured mind without flinching, went pale as milk and gripped Tolvarn's arm so hard the second fang lost feeling in his fingers for an hour. A boy came first, dark-haired like his father, with gray eyes like his mother and a cry so loud that Fenella remarked he would make an excellent alpha if he could learn to use his words instead of his lungs. When Seven placed her hand on his tiny chest, golden light pulsed beneath his skin. The old fire passed from mother to son, a healer born into the alpha line for the first time in living memory. The girl followed minutes later, smaller but fiercer, with eyes that flickered between gray and amber as if she could not decide which parent to favor. When the midwife placed her in Kadrin's arms, the tiny girl shifted. Not fully, not dangerously. Just a ripple of silver-white fur that passed across her skin and vanished, leaving behind a perfectly human infant who opened her mouth and howled with a voice that would have done a full-grown wolf proud. Every wolf in the castle howled back. Kadrin held his daughter with hands that had torn apart a forest and knelt beside the bed where his mate lay exhausted and radiant, his son already nursing at her breast. "Thank you," he said, and his voice held none of the authority of a king. It held only the raw, shattered gratitude of a man who had come within a breath of losing everything and had been given more than he ever deserved. For surviving, for fighting, for believing in us when I could not even believe in myself. Seven reached up and touched the claiming mark on his throat, the silver scar that matched the one on her collarbone. Twin marks, perfectly mirrored, proclaiming a bond that had endured poison and separation and the cruelest test fate could devise. "I never stopped believing," she said softly, "even when I tried. Even when I told myself the bond was dead and you were lost. Something in me always knew." "What?" "That the man who laughed was not the man who loved me. That somewhere beneath the poison and the politics, the wolf who chose me was still there. Still fighting. Still reaching for me in the dark." Kadrin pressed his forehead to hers. The twins lay between them. The boy with his mother's fire, the girl with her father's wolf, and the bond that connected all four of them hummed with a completeness that filled the room like sunlight. "I will spend the rest of my life earning back what that night cost us," he said. "I know you will." Seven smiled. "And I will spend the rest of mine reminding you that you already have." The great tapestry of Corvanthus was woven anew that year. The old one had hung in the great hall for generations, depicting the founding of the Wolf Kingdom in threads of gold and silver. It told the story of the first alpha, the first pack, the first laws that bound wolfkind into a civilization. The new tapestry was different. It began with a clearing in the moonlight, a wounded wolf and a woman whose hands glowed with golden fire. It showed a river stone pressed into an open palm, silver birches like columns of white flame, a mark given in trust, a mark that burned when trust was broken, a mark that survived when it should have perished because the bond beneath it was stronger than any poison. It showed a woman walking into a frozen forest with nothing but a cloak and a prayer, and a child she had sworn to protect. A cottage in a remote valley, herbs drying from ceiling beams, a life built from nothing by hands that knew how to heal. It showed a black wolf standing on a ridge in the rain, howling at an empty road, a kingdom crumbling, a king losing his grip on the world because the only anchor he had ever known had vanished. It showed wolves in a meadow, dark shapes lunging and dying, golden light in a healer's hands, a mother's rage made manifest, a father arriving like a storm given form, too late to prevent the attack, but never too late to protect what mattered most. It showed a pregnant woman walking alone into a hall full of enemies, unarmed, unafraid, and choosing to burn rather than hide. It showed two marks, mirrored and complete, a bond sealed, a family forged, and it showed twins, a boy with fire in his blood, and a girl with silver fur beneath her skin, held in the arms of parents who had crossed every darkness to find each other. The tapestry hung where the old one had been, in the great hall, where Herath had once sat on a stolen throne. Every wolf who entered the hall saw it first, the story of a servant who became a queen, not through bloodline or politics, but through a courage that no title could confer and no conspiracy could extinguish. Seven stood before it on a summer evening, her twins on her hips, the boy pulling at her hair, the girl gnawing contentedly on the silver birch circlet she had stolen from her mother's bedside table. Kadrin stood beside her, his arm around her waist, his claiming mark visible above the collar of his shirt for all the world to see. "They made me look taller than I am," Seven observed, studying the woven figure of herself walking into the great hall. "They made me look shorter," Kadrin countered. "Good. It is more accurate." He laughed. Not the laugh she had heard through the war chamber door, that hollow, drugged sound stripped of everything that made it his. This laugh was real, warm and low and rumbling against her ear, the laugh of a man standing in the wreckage of everything he had almost lost, holding everything he had fought to keep. Seven leaned into him and felt the bond pulse between them, steady and strong and complete, humming with the quiet joy of two people who had earned their happiness the hardest way imaginable. Outside the great hall, the wolves of Corvanthus went about their evening. Pups played in the courtyard. Traders argued in the marketplace. Fenella terrorized the castle physicians with her opinions on their remedies. Dorrit had opened a second tavern in the capital and was already outselling every established alehouse in the district through sheer force of personality. Tolvarn stood at his post by the great hall doors, as he always did, watching the kingdom he had helped save with the quiet satisfaction of a man who understood that his greatest act of service had been sitting outside a door for 5 days, talking to a wolf who had forgotten how to be human. And Pip, who had followed the trader's news from Brannock Hollow to the capital and somehow talked his way into an apprenticeship with the royal blacksmith, was absolutely, irreversibly, and loudly convinced that the Queen's twins would grow up to be the greatest warriors the 5 territories had ever seen. He was not entirely wrong, but that is a story for another time. Seven pressed a kiss to her daughter's forehead, then her son's. She looked up at the tapestry one last time, at the woven image of a woman walking into the dark with nothing but a cloak and a secret, and the stubborn refusal to let her story end in someone else's laughter. Was it worth it? Kadrin asked quietly. All of it. The pain, the exile, the months apart. Seven considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. Ask me again in 50 years, she said. But she was smiling when she said it. And the bond between them, that impossible, improbable, unbreakable thread of fire and moonlight and stubborn, defiant love, hummed with an answer they both already knew. It had always been worth it. It would always be worth it. Because some bonds are not forged by ceremony or politics or the approval of elder houses. Some bonds are forged in moonlit clearings by wounded wolves and brave women. They are tested by poison and laughter and frozen forests and the long, terrible silence of separation. And they survive, not because they are perfect, but because the people who carry them refuse, absolutely and irrevocably refuse, to let them break. The wolves of Corvanthus lifted their voices to the evening sky. And in the great hall, where a servant girl had once carried wine to a king who did not deserve her, a queen held her children close and listened to the howling, and knew, with a certainty that no drug or conspiracy or cruelty would ever touch, that she was home. She had always been home. She had just needed to find it. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this story.